Hi, so this is the first video for Chapter 10, which focuses on some of the classical theoretical models of oligopoly. And so one of the biggest questions with oligopoly is, okay, well, we have our model of perfect competition where price equals marginal cost, there are lots of firms, and then we have our model of a monopoly where we only have one firm and we see a much higher price, we see deadweight loss, static inefficiency. And so one of the questions we want to ask is, well, how many firms do we need to get to the perfect competition level, right? I mean, how close are we going to get if we have 2 firms, 3 firms, 10 firms, 20 firms? And these models that we're going to talk about in this chapter are going to try to answer that question. And unfortunately, what we're going to see is that a lot of it really depends on how we set up the model. And so in chapter 12, what we're going to do is really start to look at some of the data and see when sometimes, as in the Bertrand model, which we talk about, that we can approach the perfect competition level with very few firms, right? Maybe even 2 firms. Whereas in other industries, it's going to take a lot more firms to approach the perfect competition level. And that might be more akin to what we're going to call the Cournot model. So these are 2 classical models that anticipated game theory, before John Nash in the 1950s. 2 French economists, Cournot in 1838 and Bertrand in 1883. And they're very similar models, and we're going to set them up almost identically. And the key difference is that in Cournot, the firms are choosing output, so they're choosing Q instead of price. And in Bertrand, they're choosing price instead of output. And the very interesting thing in these 2 models is that they lead to completely different outcomes. That said, they're both very nice models in terms of the fact that we can generalize them to getting the monopoly solution when we only have 1 firm, and getting the perfect competition output and price as we have more and more firms. And so then we're going to focus on static models, meaning 1-period models, and think about efficiency in this chapter. And then we're going to extend these models in chapter 11 to a dynamic setting where we might have, for instance, a price leader or an output leader, and then other firms will make choices based on what that leader does. So there are lots of different oligopoly models, which makes sense, right? We think oligopoly is a reasonable approximation of most markets, right? We think most markets are not monopolies, most markets are not perfect competition, and oligopoly kind of puts everything in between there, right? Which describes most of reality. So this table in chapter 10 kind of divides up these models, right? Based on the strategic variable, whether that's output or price, or a combination, or whether you get to choose. And so we're going to focus in this chapter mostly on M1 and M2. We'll talk a little bit about M3 and M4. And then we'll look at the dynamic models in chapter 11. And we'll see how they differ from the static models. But these Cournot and Bertrand models, they're something that every economist should be comfortable with and should know the differences of, right? And the fact that they lead to very different conclusions, which was kind of Bertrand's point in making his model in the first place, shows that we really need data in order to inform, which model is correct, or which markets fit which model better.